My name is Ava Whitmore. I'm 36 years old. I run a small tax consultancy in Asheville, North Carolina. And until this morning, I believed that blood still meant something. The text came at 7:13 a.m. just as I was pouring the first cup of coffee. The screen lit up, and there it was. From my father. Don't come to the will reading. It's not your place. Don't come back. That was it. No hi Ava, no context. Just the final verdict delivered like a court sentence. I stared at it for a moment, not because I didn't believe it, but because I had expected it. The timing just felt poetic. I typed 3 words. Understood. Good luck. And then I put the phone face down. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't text my sister or call my uncle. I stirred my coffee and walked to the kitchen table where a red folder had been sitting untouched for the past 2 days. Estate of Martha C. Whitmore. Final provisions. Inside were the original trust documents, the new will video statements, and legal filings. It was notarized, signed with a timestamp, and witnessed by a third-party legal officer, unaffiliated with the Whitmore family. I took a breath. They thought they had won. They had no idea. My grandmother Martha wasn't just the matriarch of our family. She was the only one who ever saw me for who I was. To everyone else, I was the black sheep, the one who didn't toe the family line, the one who said no to the corporate job my father lined up, the one who asked too many questions. 3 months ago, she called me, asked me to come see her in private. No one else was invited. I remember her voice still sharp at 84. They don't see me anymore, Ava, she said, gripping my hand. They just see a will. I never forgot that sentence. She knew. She knew what they were doing, how they had tried to funnel her assets through side accounts, how my Uncle Alan had revised portions of the original trust, how my sister Chloe had been planning renovations on a house she didn't even own yet. Do you trust me to make this right? I asked her. She didn't hesitate. You're the only one I do. So I helped her hire a new attorney, one not connected to the Whitmore estate. We recorded everything on video with timestamp logs, cloud backups, and offline copies. The paperwork was filed with a different court district, quietly, legally, irrevocably. But I never told anyone, not even when they began locking me out of family dinners board updates or messages from the caregiving team. Not even when Chloe told me during Thanksgiving that maybe it was best if I stopped trying to belong. I knew they would show their hand. I just needed to be patient. And now, they had. The moment I read that text from my father, "Don't come back," I realized something else. They thought they had kicked me out of Grandma's will reading. But what they didn't know was that I was the only one who had ever truly been there. I took a long sip of coffee and opened my laptop. Then I clicked on the remote access link. The law office where the reading was being held had cameras installed per Grandma's explicit instruction. I had the access codes. She gave them to me herself, smiling. Let them put on a show, she said. I watched the conference room fill on my screen. Familiar faces and unfamiliar expressions. They laughed. They poured coffee. They whispered. They looked smug. They had no idea what was coming. When they realized what I had done, it was already too late. It was a Thursday afternoon when I last saw her alive. The sun was unusually warm for early March. The care home sat on a quiet slope surrounded by dogwoods. She liked that, said it reminded her of when she first arrived in the South after the war. She was sitting near the window, her hands folded over a blue crochet blanket she had made herself. It was fraying a little at the corners. She insisted on fixing it later. Come sit, she said, patting the chair beside her. I don't have a lot of time, but I need all of it with you. I took the seat. She looked at me with those eyes, clear, sharp, knowing. I asked Alan to bring me a copy of the trust last week, she began. I stiffened. He said it had already been adjusted, said I approved it months ago. But you didn't, I said. She nodded. No. And the signatures. Not mine. Not the current me anyway. She lifted the blanket to reveal a brown envelope. "This is what I want done. I want you to help me rewrite my will. And this time, I want it to mean something." I opened the envelope. It wasn't money. It was a handwritten letter, in her unmistakable cursive. Dated, signed. She looked at me and said, "They've turned this family into a business. But I'm not a brand. I'm not stock to be split." I felt my throat tighten. "You really want to go through with this?" Her answer was immediate. "If I don't, then I've already died." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out every name, every dollar, every asset. But more importantly, we talked about people. She wanted part of the estate to fund legal aid for elderly women in rural areas, women who stayed quiet their whole lives and deserved to be heard finally. She wanted the house preserved, not sold. Let it be a refuge, not a trophy. And she wanted me, not Alan, not my father, not Chloe, to be the one to oversee it. "You have their blood," she said, "but not their hunger." I helped her schedule the meeting with a third-party law firm the very next day. We took her by car, wheelchair and all. She wore her favorite brooch silver with a rose in the center. The lawyer, Miss Catherine Doyle, handled the session with care. She filmed the statement, had 2 witnesses sign. Every page was reviewed 3 times. My grandmother was lucid, strong, and uncompromising. Before we left, I asked her if she was afraid. "No," she smiled. "This is the bravest thing I've done in 40 years. That night, she gave me the blanket, the blue one. "You keep this," she said. "When they come after you, wrap it around yourself. Remember whose arms it was made from." I cried then, not from sadness, but from love so full it ached. 3 weeks later, she passed away in her sleep. They didn't even tell me until the obituary was already printed. But I had the will, I had the proof, and I had the promise. If you looked at the Whitmore family from the outside, you'd think we had it all. Sunday dinners with linen napkins and silverware polished to a shine. Christmas cards sent out early with matching outfits and a golden retriever at our feet. My father Richard always center-framed, straight-backed, crisp, smile-tailored blazer. He looked like he ran a Fortune 500 company, and in some ways he did. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a presence, a man who believed in hierarchy and legacy. He used words like lineage and honor as though they were currencies. Respect wasn't earned in our house, it was demanded. Questioning anything was betrayal. And love had terms. My Uncle Alan was softer in tone but sharper in ambition. He managed the estate finances, the legal affairs, the paperwork as he called it. But really, he was the one who ran the strings behind the curtain. If my father was the wall, Alan was the architect. Quiet, calculating, and loyal only to power. Then there was Chloe, my younger sister by 4 years. Chloe had always been the delicate one, the soft-spoken artist, the one who cried during commercials and recited poetry at dinner. To outsiders, she was the heart of the family. But I knew better. She had perfected the art of victimhood. She never openly accused me of anything. She didn't need to. All she had to do was suggest I was too abrasive, too critical, too disconnected from family values. And those little phrases worked like poison. Drip by drip, they shaped how everyone saw me. The turning point came when I was 29. I had spent 3 years at the family's investment firm, managing mid-level accounts, staying in my lane. I asked one day why the charitable foundation our name was attached to only spent 7% of its income on actual causes. The room went silent. Later that week, I was called into a meeting with my father and Alan. "You're not aligned with the family's vision," my father said, adjusting his cufflinks. "It may be time to explore independent growth." I remember sitting there numb. I wasn't being fired. That would have been honest. I was being exiled, gently with a smile. They gave me a severance package and a letter of mutual parting. Chloe hugged me that night with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "but maybe this is for the best." I drove home that evening knowing exactly what had happened. It wasn't just about the foundation. It was about control, about not being obedient enough, not playing the game. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer part of their story. People ask me why I didn't fight, why I didn't sue, why I didn't throw their hypocrisy into the spotlight. And the answer is simpler than they expect. I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that creeps into your bones, the kind that comes from years of smiling when you're dismissed, of lowering your voice when you're accused of being too intense, of being told that your value is conditional. So I stepped away. I moved out of the city and rented a small apartment near the river. I opened my own consultancy, started with 2 clients, and built from there. I grew basil on the windowsill, adopted a dog, laughed again. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I stopped showing up to family events. Not because I wasn't invited, but because I wasn't expected. At first, the silence hurt. I kept waiting for anyone to call and say, "We miss you." But no one did, except Grandma. She sent cards every few weeks. Sometimes a short note, sometimes just a pressed flower and her initials. It wasn't much, but it was something real, something human. On my birthday, she sent me a letter written by hand, though her arthritis made every stroke difficult. "You don't owe anyone your silence," she wrote. "The truth doesn't always raise its voice, but it never disappears." It stayed with me. I kept her picture in my office. Not the formal portrait from the dining room wall, but one I'd taken when we were baking together. Flower on her nose. Laugh lines deep and happy. That was the real her. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't stalk their social media or dig for scandals. I simply lived. And in doing so, I learned how to breathe again. There's a moment, though, that I still think about. A charity gala 2 years ago. My firm had been invited unbeknownst to me through a client. I walked into the room and saw them all there. My father at the podium, Chloe glowing in a champagne gown, Alan shaking hands with donors. I wasn't supposed to be seen, but I didn't turn around. I didn't hide. I walked past them quietly, confidently, and took my seat. They saw me. My father's smile tightened. Chloe blinked confused. Alan looked away. I didn't speak to them. I didn't need to. That night I realized something. I hadn't lost a family. I had shed a system. Their love came with conditions. Their respect came with scripts. And their kindness was always an exchange. I didn't want that anymore. When Grandma called me that final time asking for help with her will, I said yes, not out of bitterness, but because she was the last one who had ever loved me without a transaction. I helped her rewrite the will not to win, but to restore something that had been broken for too long. I didn't fight back because I had already left the battlefield. But when they tried to burn the bridge behind me, they forgot I had built another one quietly, steadily, and with my own hands. And this one they couldn't touch. 2 days before the official reading, I received a call from an old family friend, Marlene, one of the paralegals who used to work under my Uncle Alan. We hadn't spoken in years, not since I left the family company, but the message in her voice was unmistakable. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she said quietly, but Alan brought in the old will, the one from 2015. He made some changes to the distribution clauses, said your grandmother had reviewed them verbally. My pulse slowed, not sped up. That was the first sign I'd changed. What kind of changes, I asked, notebook already in hand. "Reallocations to ensure equal support for loyal family members." That's how he phrased it. "You weren't on the final draft." There it was. I thanked her, hung up, closed my office door, and pulled out the black lockbox under my desk. Inside the folder labeled Martha Whitmore, Final Legal Action. It had been there since March, untouched, unopened, but not forgotten. Every document filed through Catherine Doyle, the independent estate attorney my grandmother had handpicked. The files had been sent to probate court registered under a sealed filing process to avoid interception. My grandmother had insisted. They'll look for shortcuts, she told me once, but will leave no doors open for them to sneak through. I opened my laptop, navigated to the secure drive, and pulled up the master files. First, the video testimony. Grandma sat in a small room back, straight, voice clear. "This is my true final will. No one else has authority. If this is ever questioned, this recording stands as truth. Timestamp, date, verified signature from two independent witnesses. Second, the document files. Every line, initial, clause, and signature reviewed and logged. The funds restructured into a protected trust. Assets redirected to the community foundation we had discussed. Chloe's name was absent. Alan received nothing. My father was left a single line. No financial assets shall be awarded due to a breach of trust. I had read that sentence a dozen times since. It still made my stomach shift. Not out of guilt, but out of recognition. It was justice, not revenge. I checked the backup copies, cloud-encrypted USB-printed duplicates stored off-site. They were all intact. Still, I felt a chill. Alan wasn't stupid. He knew the risks of tampering. But he also knew how powerful perception was. If he presented a version of the will that seemed legitimate, it would cast just enough doubt, especially with the lawyer he'd chosen to represent it. His name was James Rutledge. I remembered him from my early days at the firm. Expensive watch, silk tie, and a handshake that felt like theater. He was the family's go-to fixer, always one step ahead of a paper trail. I once overheard him tell Alan, "You don't need to be right. You just need to look reasonable." Seeing his name on the preliminary documents filed with the courthouse was confirmation they were going to try something bold. I didn't panic. Instead, I reviewed the last piece of evidence. It was the one that mattered most. A notarized document signed by Grandma stating that any prior versions of her will were null and void, and that no member of the Whitmore family had legal authority to amend or override it. The phrasing had been her idea. She wanted it simple, sharp. I leaned back in my chair, breathing in slowly. Let them try. Let them walk into that reading with smug smiles and perform their little pageant of inheritance. I had the truth, not just in writing, but in voice, in face, in intention. They weren't fighting for her legacy. They were fighting for entitlement dressed as love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing toward them. Not fear, not rage, not even sorrow. They hadn't stolen my family. They had freed me from a prison I hadn't realized I'd outgrown. I reached out to Catherine Doyle the same afternoon I confirmed Alan was planning to present the old will. Catherine wasn't just thorough, she was strategic. A former litigator who'd retired from courtroom drama to focus on estate law. She had a calm voice and eyes that missed nothing. My grandmother chose her precisely for that reason. "We anticipated this," she said over the phone without surprise. "Do you want me to initiate a protective order for the revised will?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them feel safe." Instead, we reviewed the existing legal shield we'd quietly put in place months ago. The revised will had already been filed, sealed, and timestamped with Buncombe County Probate Court under a confidentiality request. The reason, clear and present concern of document tampering. It was a clause few people used. Most didn't even know it existed. But Catherine did, and Grandma had insisted. "I want the truth waiting in a vault," she said once. Not floating around for them to rewrite. We confirmed the filing date, the judge's signature, the court's acknowledgement. Everything was locked, irrevocable, enforceable. Next came security. Catherine had arranged for the reading to take place in a private conference room at her firm. A space equipped with audio-visual recording, by default something they used for sensitive estate declarations. We double-checked the cameras, verified the audio sync, and added a second backup recording system that saved locally and to a remote cloud location only I could access. Not paranoia preparation. We also enabled a digital activity log that tracked any access to the room, any file opened, any device connected to the system. If anyone tried to tamper, we'd know. "Do you want to attend in person?" Catherine asked. I thought about it. "No," I said. They already told me not to come. I'd rather keep it that way. She didn't question it. I didn't need to be in the room to be present. I would be watching from my office remote feed open folder, ready backup files printed and notarized. As I walked through each step, each verification, each security measure, I felt something strange settle over me. Not nerves, not adrenaline. Stillness. Like standing in the eye of a hurricane where the air is almost too quiet. I was moving between two worlds, the one I had been born into, and the one I had built on my own. I was surrounded by a name that used to define me, and now barely touched me. Whitmore. It used to be a badge. Then it became a burden. Now it was just a word in a legal header. I thought about my grandmother's voice in that video recording, steady, deliberate. I remembered the way her hands trembled when she signed the last page, and how she looked up at me and said, "They'll try to erase this, but you won't let them." And I wouldn't. Let them come with altered clauses and polished shoes. Let them smile and shake hands and pretend they're protecting her wishes. When the moment arrived, they would discover that Grandma's legacy didn't lie in a signature. It lived in the structure of the truth, and the truth was already sealed in a courthouse vault far out of reach. The camera feed came online at exactly 10:02 a.m. It was a single-angle view, static, unblinking, mounted high in the corner of the conference room. The image wasn't glamorous, beige walls, fluorescent lights, a table polished too hard, and 6 chairs arranged with false symmetry. But I had never been more grateful for a piece of technology. They arrived one by one, each carrying the weight of assumption like a crown. My father entered first, sharply dressed as always. Charcoal suit, navy tie shoes that probably cost more than my entire living room. He didn't acknowledge the receptionist or the intern who offered him water. He simply sat spine straight and pulled out a notepad as though he were preparing for a board meeting. To him, everything was business, even grief. He glanced around the room like a CEO awaiting shareholders, not family members. No emotion, no mourning, just calculation. Uncle Alan came next, a step behind, more casual but just as rehearsed. Gray blazer, no tie, open collar. He had that politician's smile, half earnest, half smug. He greeted the staff by name, as if reminding everyone that he'd been here before. He even commented on the framed art in the hallway. "This is where she wanted it, huh?" he said aloud to no one in particular, scanning the room like it belonged to him. Good. Feels formal enough. He looked comfortable, confident, like a man expecting control to be returned to its rightful owner himself. Then came Chloe. She arrived in black, of course, though the outfit looked more designer than mourning. A silk blouse tucked into a pencil skirt, heels she could barely walk in. Her makeup was immaculate lips, slightly redder than tasteful. A tissue already in hand. She stepped into the room and paused dramatically, letting her eyes well up before anyone even said a word. "Sorry," she whispered, voice cracking just enough to echo. "This is just harder than I thought." She kissed my father's cheek, let her head rest on his shoulder for exactly 4 seconds, then took the seat closest to the lawyer's chair, as if to position herself for some cinematic reveal. I watched all of this from the other side of the screen, sitting in my office with the blinds drawn and the audio streaming through earbuds. The feed was sharp, the sound was clear, but the distance between me and them felt even sharper. They didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I had already filed the will they were about to hear, and that their performance was being recorded from multiple angles. The room settled. Alan poured coffee. Chloe dabbed her eyes again. My father tapped his pen with metronomic precision. At 10:11, Catherine Doyle walked in. She wore a gray suit, no makeup, hair pulled back. Understated, professional. Everything about her presence cut through the false warmth like a scalpel. "Good morning," she said, setting her briefcase down without small talk. "Let's begin." There was no roll call, no formal introductions. They knew who they were. They knew who wasn't there. Still, Chloe asked, "Is Ava joining remotely?" A beat passed, then another. "No," Catherine said. "She will not be attending." Chloe blinked, masking a smirk. Alan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. My father didn't move. In that moment, they believed the story they had written was proceeding exactly as planned. No Ava meant no disruption, no confrontation, no voice to challenge the script they had rehearsed in their heads. I could almost feel the room exhale. Let them have it. Let them ride the crest of anticipation. Because the higher they climbed, the further they would fall. And the moment was coming soon, when all the masks would drop. The silence in my office felt holy. My grandmother had once told me, "You don't have to be in the room to change it." She was right. Because even now, as they adjusted their posture and practiced their humble faces, the room had already shifted. They just didn't know it yet. Catherine reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed brown envelope stamped with the probate court's insignia and a time date certification in blue ink. Her fingers moved with the steadiness of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and had no intention of softening it. "This is the final legally binding will and trust document for the estate of Martha C. Whitmore," she said, "filed with Buncombe County Probate Court on March 19th. And registered under sealed record for reasons of confidentiality and protection against unauthorized amendment." Alan straightened in his seat, and I watched the edges of his composure start to fray. Catherine continued placing the open document on the table. The contents were dictated, reviewed, and signed by Mrs. Whitmore herself, with 2 independent witnesses present, and a full video record stored with the court. My father blinked once. Chloe shifted in her chair. Catherine flipped the cover sheet, then began to read. "To my family. In life I have tried to give freely, not just of my possessions, but of my time, my energy, and my trust. That trust, I now realize, was often misplaced." A pause. Chloe's mouth parted slightly. Alan glanced toward the window. "I leave the entirety of my estate, excluding designated charitable distributions, to be held in trust under the newly established Martha C. Whitmore Foundation. The foundation shall be operated at the discretion of my granddaughter, Ava Whitmore, whom I name sole executor, legal trustee, and beneficiary of operational control." The silence cracked. What Alan snapped. My father didn't speak, but the lines around his mouth deepened. Chloe's hand clutched her tissue tighter, the performance slipping. Catherine kept going unbothered. "Richard Whitmore, Alan Whitmore, and Chloe Whitmore shall receive no personal financial inheritance from my estate, as a consequence of prior actions which have eroded the integrity of this family's legacy." Chloe shot up from her chair. "This isn't real," she said, voice rising. "This is not what Grandma said. This isn't." Alan cut her off. "Where is the will I gave you?" he barked at Catherine. Catherine looked at him, calm, patient, immune. "There is no other will," she said. "Any prior documents have been rendered legally null and void by Mrs. Whitmore's direct instruction and signature. All verifications are on file." "This is fraudulent," my father finally said. "You're working with Ava. She's poisoned her mind." Catherine didn't flinch. Instead, she tapped her tablet and brought up a screen on the wall-mounted monitor. Grandma appeared. Not a photograph. A video. She was sitting in the same gray suit, eyes bright and deliberate. "This is Martha Whitmore," she said, "and this is my final legal statement regarding my estate. If anyone claims to speak on my behalf or present an alternative version of this document, they are lying, plain and simple." The room went still. My father's hands curled into fists. Alan's eyes narrowed, darting toward Catherine's bag, as if he could reverse time by sheer force. Chloe sat back down, staring ahead. Catherine let the video play for another minute, just long enough to show the timestamp, the witness signatures, and the court seal. Then she paused the screen and looked around the table. "This will is final. It has already been validated by the court. Any challenges to its authenticity will be reviewed under the charge of perjury and attempted fraud." I watched from my office, heart steady. Not because I wanted to see them fall, but because I needed them to know I hadn't lied. The will wasn't just a document. It was a boundary, one my grandmother had drawn with clarity and conviction. They had assumed I would stay quiet. They had assumed that being written out meant being erased. but I wasn't the one being erased. I was the one they forgot to watch. And now they were seeing me clearly for the first time. The first sign of retaliation came 3 days after the will reading. It arrived not as a lawsuit or a direct confrontation, but as a headline, subtle, vague, and laced with implication. Local heiress, named sole beneficiary in last-minute will change. Family raises concerns. At first, I thought it was just the media doing what it always does, chasing drama. But then came the follow-ups, anonymous sources, quotes from close relatives, phrases like suspicious timing and undue influence. They didn't use my name at first, but it didn't take long before they did. Ava Whitmore, estranged granddaughter of Martha Whitmore, now oversees an estate valued in the tens of millions, leaving her father, uncle, and sister with nothing. Allegations of forgery are under review. No one called to verify. No one asked for my statement. The court documents were sealed, but somehow the story had legs and they were sprinting. That night, I received an email from a journalist at the Asheville Tribune. She said she'd been told to look into some inconsistencies in the trust documents. Inconsistencies, I typed back, only exist when people lie. I didn't hear from her again. What I did hear, however, was from Catherine. They've retained a forensic document examiner, she said, sounding more annoyed than alarmed. His name is Bradley McTiernan. He's been discredited before, but he still shows up in courtrooms when people want drama. What exactly are they hoping he finds, I asked. Anything that plants doubt, even if it's baseless. I sat back in my chair, staring out the window of my office. The foundation launch had been scheduled for the following week. Invitations had gone out. Donors had begun expressing interest. The first draft of our grant distribution plan had been finalized, and now in the space of 72 hours, the name Whitmore had gone from legacy to liability. It wasn't just public perception. Quiet donors began withdrawing. Our team received anonymous emails questioning my ethics. Someone sent a Freedom of Information request to the court trying to access sealed documents. Then came the breach attempt. I was reviewing end-of-week reports late one night when the notification appeared on my screen. Unauthorized login attempt detected. Admin drive, 11:37 p.m. At first I assumed it was just a glitch, maybe one of our interns working late. But when I checked the log, the IP address didn't match anyone on our team. The access location traced to a coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. They weren't subtle. Catherine advised me to document everything which I already had. Security camera footage, log timestamps, the alert system I'd had installed weeks ago because I knew deep down they wouldn't let this go quietly. Still, seeing it in real time was something else. They had lost, but they refused to accept it. And if they couldn't beat me in the room, they'd try to unravel me outside of it. I reported the breach to the police and sent the logs to our cybersecurity firm. Within hours, they confirmed an attempted upload of extraction software, a low-level intrusion, but enough to suggest someone wanted access to private financial records. I didn't need to ask who. They had always believed the family name was something to be managed to be manipulated. And now that it was out of their hands, they couldn't handle the silence. They needed a villain. They needed a headline. And I had given them the perfect one by doing what none of them thought I could, telling the truth and letting it stand on its own. But truth, as I was learning, made people uncomfortable, especially those who had built their lives on the comfort of lies. So they painted me as the mastermind, the estranged granddaughter, the opportunist. They hired experts with stained credentials. They whispered to journalists. They flooded the air with doubt, hoping that noise would outweigh the clarity of a single signed document. It didn't matter that we had video, or that the will was filed and validated months before her death, or that every legal authority stood behind it. They weren't trying to win in court. They were trying to bleed me in the public eye, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Not because I feared losing the case, but because the people who were supposed to love me once were now trying to ruin me entirely. They weren't family. They were a storm. And I was standing in the middle, holding the only umbrella that mattered, the truth. I didn't call a press conference. I didn't release a statement dripping with emotion. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I built a folder, a digital one simple in layout, but airtight in content. I named it Verification Materials, Estate of Martha C. Whitmore. Inside were 4 items, each labeled time-stamped and verified by independent counsel. The first was a full-resolution copy of the video we'd recorded with Grandma on March 18th, 36 minutes of uninterrupted footage. Her voice was steady, her words deliberate. I have reviewed every line she said, holding the pen in her trembling hand. This document reflects my wishes, no one else's. The footage included the signing process, the notary's seal, the witness signatures, and a verbal confirmation of intent from Grandma herself. The original file was watermarked, its metadata protected, and backed up on a cold drive locked in a safe. The second item was a set of surveillance clips from the law office. Grandma arriving in her wheelchair, accompanied by me and Catherine. Her entering the secure conference room. The timestamp synced with the internal server clock. Her laughing with the receptionist afterward. She wasn't coerced. She wasn't confused. She was exactly who she'd always been, sharp, proud, and deeply intentional. The third was a complete electronic record of the digital signature used during the estate filing. Catherine had submitted the final version of the will to the court, using an encrypted e-signature protocol complete with 2-factor authentication and a remote confirmation call from Grandma's landline. Every log entry, every IP address, every click documented. The fourth item was the name and sworn affidavit of our independent witness, Rebecca Hall. Rebecca wasn't just a legal clerk. She was a retired judge who volunteered at the estate planning center once a week. She had witnessed the signing not out of convenience, but by request. Grandma had asked for someone who knew what manipulation looked like. Rebecca had seen the entire process and signed a notarized affidavit the same day, attesting to Grandma's mental clarity, comprehension, and willful intent. I sent all of it to Catherine. She compiled it into a legal package and submitted it quietly, not to the press, but to the court registry, and to the legal teams representing my father, Alan and Chloe. No noise, no accusations, just documentation. The backlash came quickly. Within 48 hours, their expert witness, Bradley McTiernan, pulled his name from the report, citing conflicting evidence and chain of custody concerns. The Tribune issued a quiet retraction at the bottom of their next issue. Further documentation has clarified the estate's legal standing. The previous article may have mischaracterized certain claims, but that wasn't the part that mattered most. The real shift came from the silence. The text stopped, the rumors thinned, and slowly the donors returned. People don't always believe the loudest voice. Sometimes they believe the quiet one that doesn't flinch. I hadn't insulted anyone. I hadn't dragged my family through the mud. I simply held up a mirror, and they couldn't bear the reflection. The law didn't need my emotions. It just needed my evidence. And I had more than enough. When Catherine called to confirm that no further legal challenges would be pursued, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded as if I'd always known it would end like this. Because deep down I had. My grandmother hadn't raised me to fight fire with fire. She'd raised me to walk through fire and not lose myself. So I did. Not with rage, not with threats, but with truth, the one thing they never expected me to carry all the way to the end. The message came late at night, hours after the legal dust had finally settled. No greeting, no punctuation, just words flung across the screen with the force of old wounds resurfacing. "You're a snake, you will pay for this." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then another. There was no question who had sent it. My father had always been careful with appearances articulate in public, poised in meetings, calm in conflict. But in private, in moments when control slipped from his fingers, he could be cruel in the quietest ways. This text wasn't the first time he tried to wound me with language. It was just the most honest. A snake. I suppose that's how he saw me now. Cold, slithering, dangerous. Never mind that everything I had done was to protect the wishes of the woman who raised him. Never mind that I had followed every rule, respected every law, and documented every step. To him, none of that mattered. What mattered was that I had embarrassed him. What mattered was that I hadn't stayed in my place. What mattered was that I had broken formation. That word snake hit harder than I expected, not because it was accurate, but because I could still remember the last time he touched me without resentment. I was 17. It was the night before my high school graduation. I'd been accepted to a university out of state full scholarship. He hadn't come to the award banquet, said he was traveling for a board meeting. But when I got home there, he was standing in the doorway of my bedroom holding a glass of scotch. "You'll do well," he said, his voice low, unreadable. I waited for something more, a hug, a nod, even a pat on the shoulder. Instead, he turned and began walking away. But halfway down the hall, he stopped. He looked back, walked toward me, and almost awkwardly opened his arms. I stepped in without hesitation. His embrace was stiff, brief, but I held on to it like it meant something, like it was the start of something new, like it was proof that beneath all the silence, there was a father who still saw his daughter. He let go first. He said nothing else that night. The next morning, he was gone before breakfast. I carried that moment with me for years, treasured it, replayed it in lonely hours when everything else he did seemed cold and unreachable. But now, reading his message, "You will pay for this," I saw the truth for what it was. That hug hadn't been warmth. It had been obligation. And I had spent too many years waiting for a version of him that didn't exist. I set the phone down without replying. What could I have said? That he had betrayed his own mother's trust? That he had conspired to rewrite a woman's dying wishes? That he had stood in a courtroom and tried to erase the one granddaughter who had never asked for more than to be heard? He wouldn't have believed it. He would have called it manipulation. So I said nothing, because silence sometimes is the sharpest answer. Later that night, I wrote in my journal a habit I'd picked up during the legal storm, something to anchor me when everything felt like noise. I wrote one line, I waited for another kind of embrace, but all I ever got was his back. And then I closed the journal. I pulled the blanket Grandma had knitted across my lap, the same one she gave me the day we signed the documents, the one she said I'd need when the world got loud and ugly. It was soft and warm and real, everything he wasn't. After everything was said and done, after the signatures were verified, the headlines corrected, and the truth confirmed, I had a decision to make. I sat across from Catherine Doyle in her office, a folder of evidence between us: emails, attempted breaches, false declarations, and the digital footprint of a campaign designed to smear me and undermine my grandmother's final will. Catherine didn't sugarcoat it. "We have more than enough to pursue criminal charges," she said, flipping a page. "Attempted document fraud conspiracy to defraud an estate, digital intrusion, even witness tampering if we can tie the expert witness to their private communications." I nodded because I knew she was right. They had crossed every line, broken every code, insulted the law, and my grandmother's memory in one clean sweep. And I had the receipts to burn them all down. "But I'm not going to press charges," I said quietly. Catherine blinked. She didn't argue. She just closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Are you sure I was?" But not for the reasons most people assumed. When word got out, because it always does, the backlash was immediate. Not from strangers, not from critics, but from people I respected. People who had stood by me during the storm. People who had watched my family twist the narrative and try to ruin me. "You're letting them off the hook," one friend said. "If the roles were reversed, they'd bury you," another told me. And maybe they were right. Maybe I was too soft, too gentle, too tired. But what none of them understood was that I didn't need them destroyed to feel whole again. I had already won. Not in court, not in headlines, but in choosing to step out of the cycle they had lived in their whole lives, one of control, retaliation, and inheritance as weapon. That wasn't my world anymore. I didn't want revenge that left ashes. I wanted peace that could grow something new. Yes, I could have pressed charges, I could have made headlines, I could have forced them to stand in orange jumpsuits and answer for what they did. And maybe for a while that would have satisfied something in me. The part that had been humiliated, the part that had been exiled, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be told, don't come back. But justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about choosing to stop the bleeding. I had already taken everything they valued: the money, the legacy, the perception of moral superiority. What more did I need? So I let it go. Not because they deserved mercy, but because I deserved freedom. That didn't mean I forgot. It didn't mean I forgave. It meant I made a choice not to carry their weight any longer. And that choice came with consequences. Some people respected it. Others called it cowardice. I remember sitting down for an interview with a local radio station, part of the outreach for the foundation launch. The host asked me point blank, "With everything you went through, why didn't you take them to court?" I paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "Because I didn't need them to fall. I just needed to stand." That line went viral for a week. People debated it in comment sections. Some applauded the strength. Others mocked the restraint. But I didn't care, because I wasn't speaking for applause. I was speaking for survival. Forgiveness, as I've come to understand it, isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about cutting the rope from your own neck and walking away. Some people will never understand that. They'll mistake it for weakness, for naivety, for fear. But I know what it is. It's power, quiet, grounded, self-contained, the kind of power that doesn't need permission. And that's the only kind I ever wanted. The office building still had my father's name on the side when I signed the closing documents. Whitmore Holdings etched in bronze above the glass doors, bold, proud, and now completely mine. They had sold it quietly. The legal costs, combined with a few poor investment choices, had forced their hand. It went up for sale through a blind trust, probably to save face. But I recognized the address immediately. It was the same building where I'd once been told I didn't belong. The same elevator where I'd stood clutching a cardboard box of my things after being encouraged to pursue other ventures. And now I own the deed. I didn't throw a party. I didn't even change the exterior lettering, at least not right away. I wanted to walk through the halls one last time with the old name above them, just to remember how it felt. And then 1 week later, I replaced it. A brushed steel plaque now greets every visitor: the Martha Whitmore Foundation. Dignity, legacy, and quiet strength. We opened the doors on a gray Monday morning with no ribbon cutting, no press conference, just quiet movement. Desks being assembled, boxes unpacked, a coffee pot gurgling in the break room. But there was a gravity to it, a stillness I hadn't expected. It felt sacred. Each floor was carefully designed. We didn't aim for luxury, we aimed for warmth. Soft lighting shelves of books, art from local female artists. I worked with architects who understood space not just as function, but as safety. We turned the top floor, the old executive suite, into an open-plan community center. There were no corner offices anymore, just tables, couches, and private counseling rooms. I insisted that every door be soundproof, every hallway wide enough for walkers and wheelchairs. We built a kitchen not just for staff, but for clients. Some of the women we served hadn't had access to a full stove in years, and the rooms, each one bore a name. Not of donors, not of corporate sponsors, but of the women my grandmother had cared for in her final years. The Louise Room, the Edith Room, the Rosalind Room. Names that would have disappeared from public record, now carved into wood and bronze, preserved in every sign and directory. We support elderly women, specifically those who are isolated, under-resourced, and overlooked. Some are widowed. Some are estranged from their families. Some are victims of financial abuse from their own children. They come here to speak with our legal team, to receive help with housing applications, to get groceries, counseling, tax help, even just a ride to a clinic. And we don't ask for repayment. The foundation is fully funded from Grandma's estate. Her assets, once sought after by people who saw her as a financial opportunity, are now serving women like her. Women who gave everything and were left with nothing. That was her real legacy. Not the house, not the money, but this space, this offering. On our first Friday open, I stood near the entrance watching as two women in their 70s chatted in the kitchen laughing over a shared pot of tea. One had just received assistance filing her first restraining order. The other was showing off photos of her new garden apartment. No one asked them to move along. No one timed their visit. They were home. A staffer passed by and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but my throat tightened. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just holding ground, I was planting something lasting. Not revenge, not victory, just purpose. Grandma would have loved it here, not because it honored her name, but because it served her values. And as I walked back toward my office, a small corner suite with no titles on the door, I passed each room and ran my fingers over the names. Louise, Edith, Rosalind. And next to the elevator, a final plaque, Martha's Place. You're not forgotten. You never were. I stopped, breathed it in, and smiled. Because this wasn't just for them. It was for all of us who'd ever been told we didn't belong and chose to build something anyway. I hadn't touched a knitting needle in years, but something about the way that first winter crept into the corners of our new office made me pick them up again. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was grief wrapped in muscle memory. Or maybe it was just a quiet ache for something handmade in a world that had turned so cold. I began with a single scarf. Soft gray yarn with a faint rose undertone, just like the one Grandma used to wear on the porch when the wind picked up. I didn't try to replicate hers exactly. That felt like a disservice. I just let my fingers remember what hers used to do. Loop, pull, twist, not undo, start again. It was for a woman named Marcia. She had come into our office with bruises half faded and a voice as brittle as cracked glass. Her son had drained her account, sold her car, signed her up for credit cards she didn't know existed. And when she finally asked him to leave, he told her no one else would care. We did. We filed the restraining order, got her housing, rebuilt her finances. And on her last day at the center, when she packed her things to move into a new place with her own name on the lease, I handed her the scarf. I know it's just yarn, I said almost apologetically. She didn't say anything at first, just held it, then pulled it close like something sacred. And finally, her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from something more ancient. This is the first time someone's given me something, she whispered, without needing me to earn it. I felt something in me shatter gently, but irreversibly. She wrapped the scarf around her neck and looked at herself in the mirror, touching the fabric like it was the first warm thing she'd felt in years. Then she turned to me and said almost in disbelief, "It's the first time I've been called worthy." The word stuck with me all day. Worthy. Not successful. Not useful. Not strong. Just worthy. That night, I sat in my small office, pulled out the rest of the yarn, and began again. Loop, pull, twist. I kept thinking about Grandma, about the last time I watched her knit. She was sitting by the window undoing a scarf she'd nearly finished. "Why are you taking it apart?" I'd asked, confused. She didn't look up, just kept unraveling. "Because the pattern's off," she said. "You can't fix a mistake by weaving over it. You have to undo it, knot by knot." "Doesn't that make you mad?" She smiled. "No, it just means I care about the final shape more than the time it takes." And then she added, almost offhand, "Sometimes, Ava, you have to take a life apart before you can build it right." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Because that's what we were doing, one scarf, one woman, one small act at a time. Unraveling what had been broken. Undoing the lies they'd been told that they were burdens or leftovers or too late. And instead, knitting something that said, "You matter. You belong. You are worthy." We began keeping a basket of scarves in the main hallway. Women could take one if they needed warmth, or comfort, or just a reminder that someone thought of them while making it. Each scarf came with a small card handmade for you by someone who believes in second chances. I didn't sign them. It wasn't about recognition. It was about stitching love into silence. I never asked Marcia what she did with her scarf, but 3 months later, we got a postcard from her new apartment. It had one line: "It still smells like hope." I never filed charges. I didn't send subpoenas or hire private investigators. I didn't leak anything to the press or call in favors. I just let the truth breathe, and it did the rest, unraveling them like bad stitches. Alan was the first to crumble. It started quietly, a flag discrepancy in a nonprofit audit he'd chaired for years. Then came questions about property transfers, missing grant money, false reporting. Within a month, the investigation had widened, names appeared, timelines blurred, and Alan was suddenly too busy to speak at the regional finance conference he'd once headlined. He called me once. No apology. Just anger barely disguised as confusion. "They're trying to ruin me," he said like it was news. "They didn't have to try Alan," I replied. Then I hung up. I haven't heard from him since. Dad was next. His public life had always been his Fortress School Board's advisory committee's gala speeches. He was a man of appearances, more myth than man. Until that myth cracked. Someone no one knows who leaked his old letter to me. The one with venom in every line. The one that ended with "You are a snake, and snakes deserve to be crushed." It spread like wildfire, first among private circles, then forums, then the local press. Suddenly people looked at him differently. That charismatic smile didn't land the same when you imagined what it could hide. The schools quietly asked him to step down. The charities found reasons not to renew his board terms. Even the church, his sanctuary, stopped inviting him to speak. He resigned from everything within 3 weeks. He sent no messages this time. And then there was Chloe. She disappeared. Not physically, she still lived in town, but online she erased herself. Every account gone, every photo wiped. Every blog post, quote card, curated healing journey, now a 404 error. Some said she moved away. Others said she stayed, but simply shrank from view. I don't know. And maybe that's the point. She built her power through perception. Without it, she had no gravity. No one mentioned her name anymore. At first, I thought I'd feel vindicated, that I'd stand taller watching the towers that cast shadows over me finally fall. But all I felt was space, room to breathe, to be, to stop flinching at phone vibrations and unmarked letters. In the silence left behind, I planted something new. Not revenge, just peace. Because in the end, they weren't destroyed by me. They were undone by who they really were when no one was lying for them anymore. And that was enough. I was never good at interviews. I used to dodge them, defer, decline. But this one felt different. The anchor asked me straight-faced, "Some say you destroyed your family to gain power. What would you say to them?" I looked into the camera, not for them, but for the version of me still watching from some faraway corner of her past. "I didn't destroy my family," I said. "I just refused to keep playing the victim." The room went silent. Even she seemed caught off guard. But it was the truth. For the first time in my life, I had chosen me. Not out of spite, not out of rebellion, but because the alternative was to keep shrinking until I vanished entirely. After the segment aired, messages poured in. Not all were kind, but many were. Women, men, children of silence, people who said they saw themselves in my quiet fight. That afternoon, I went to the office. The official nameplate for the Martha Whitmore Foundation had arrived. Brushed bronze, elegant serif. I held it for a moment, letting its weight settle into my palm, then carried it to the main wall just beyond the entrance. The sunlight hit the metal as I gently drilled it in one screw at a time. And just beside it, I mounted a photograph of Grandma. She was seated in her favorite armchair, half smiling, her fingers wrapped around pale blue yarn. A scarf in progress, always in progress. It wasn't just a picture. It was a promise. that every woman who walked through these doors would feel seen, not evaluated, not pitied, just seen. We later placed a small plaque beneath it with her favorite saying, "Kindness isn't weakness, it's quiet strength." I stood there longer than I meant to, watching the photo, touching the corners of the frame, listening to the sound of soft voices echo from down the hall, volunteers unpacking blankets, staff laughing quietly over tea. This was our new family, not bound by blood, but by choice. I remember thinking, if this is what losing everything looks like, maybe I never really lost it all. They said I stole the family legacy, but what I actually did was rescue it from the fire and rebuild it with my own hands. And that made all the difference. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.